singularitarians. Singularitarians. Still a difficult word for me. Singularians, that should be easier. We're still talking about Ray Kurzweil's book. We really want to read it in a series of YouTube broadcasts, and that may take us several years. Maybe the singularity will just pass it until we are there. And in the last episode, we discussed actually the complications we have in understanding the singularity. There's a lot of criticism of Ray Kurzweil, and he says, hey, look, what's in your way is your intuition. Our brain is just not designed to understand exponential growth. And well, I mean, I'm quite sure most of the people who are interested in Ray Kurzweil, they understand it. And in my mind, but maybe I'm too far away from people. I mean, I don't know, but in my mind, I feel like everybody should already know what is exponential growth. We have that with regard to COVID-19. We see a few cases, and then as Nassim Taleb would say, well, the fat end, that's the medium. And it's hard to predict, but it's like a rare event that will happen, and that poses quite a risk for us. So we should be aware of that. And it's incredibly hard to predict when we are at the knee of the curve, but because the risk is so high, we should maybe consider it. And maybe COVID-19 is such a case, maybe not a black swan event because it's expectable. We already have seen some diseases that spread out over the planet, so we can easier prepare for that one. But definitely it is an exponential growth because, you know, like all the debates about the R rates. I don't have to dive deep into that for people understanding it. We observe the same for the question of solar panels, and here we observe a negative exponential growth, especially what concerns the price of solar panels. Now you might say, wow, I want to invest in solar panels. Well, I did that. I invested in Jinko Solar and in, what's the other one? Also Chinese one. And the course just dropped because it was heavily subsidized by the Chinese government. And as soon as they removed these subsidies, how to make a profit? Like the price is just dropping. How are you going to make a big profit, right? Solar cell production seems to be so easy in manufacturing that it's really, really cheap. So if you maybe want to invest in this exponential trend, because the trend for solar power is indeed exponential, and this is no financial advice, this is just my opinion, right? For some reason, everybody who's related to the stock market says that. I don't know if I'm legally liable if I didn't say that, but this is no financial advice, just to be on the safe side. So if you want to invest in solar energy, right, we see clearly in exponential growth. You see here that we have a logarithmic scale where we say like 1 gigawatt production, 10 gigawatt production, 100 and 1000 gigawatt production. And we find here this neat line, almost a straight line, which means it's almost a perfect exponential growth. If we depicted it on a normal scale, I would say, then we will see that. So if you wanted to invest, or if you want to invest in solar energy, then maybe you should invest in solar parks, like the places where that energy gets generated, because I'm strongly convinced that solar energy will be the energy of the future, which maybe the singularity will utilize in order to get all of that energy. Now, there are some interesting facts about like the exponential growth that many people in my mind tend to underestimate. So for example, the MSCI world on average grows 7% a year. Usually it grows more, but if you get in on a bad Sunday and the next Monday COVID just happens, it drops, and then you need a lot of time to recover. Well, you didn't need that much for COVID, but probably in the 2008 financial crisis. But even then, on a span of 15 years, you make 7% on average a year. Now, what does that mean? 7% on average a year. it means that you double your money in how many years? Just 7%? How many years? Well, so this is actually usually hard to be understood, and there is an interesting video that I want to watch with you together. And I turn off the microphone now, and then we are going to watch it together.
You paid $5 for an all-day lift ticket. Now, what's the doubling time for 7% growth? 10 years. So what was the cost 10 years later in 1973? 10 years later in 1983? 10 years later in 1993? And what do we have to look forward to? Now, this is what 7% means. Most people don't have a clue. Well, let's look at a generic graph of something that's growing steadily. After one doubling time, the growing quantity is up to twice its initial size. Two doubling times, it's up to 4 times its initial size. Then it goes to 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. In just 10 doubling times, it's 1,000 times larger than when it started. And you can see, if you try to make a graph of that on ordinary graph paper, the graph will go right through the ceiling. Now let me give you an example to show the enormous numbers you get with just a modest number of doublings. Legend has it that the game of chess was invented by a mathematician who worked for a king. The king was very pleased. He said, "I want to reward you." And the mathematician said, "My needs are modest. Please take my new chessboard and on the first square place 1 grain of wheat. On the next square double a 1 to make 2. On the next square double a 2 to make 4. Just keep doubling till you've doubled for every square. That will be an adequate payment." Well, we can guess the king thought, this foolish man. I was ready to give him a real reward. All he asked for is just a few grains of wheat. Well, let's see what's involved in this. We note there are 8 grains on the 4th square. Now I can get this number 8 by multiplying 3 2's together. It's 2 times 2 times 2. It's 1 2 less than the number of the square. Now that follows in each case. So on the last square, I'd find the number of grains by multiplying 63 2's together. Now let's look at the way the totals build up. When we have 1 grain on the first square, the total on the board is 1. We add 2 grains, that makes a total 3. We put on 4 grains, now the total is 7. 7 is a grain less than 8. It's a grain less than 3 2's multiplied. 15 is a grain less than 4 2's multiplied.
So I'm sorry for the confusion, but you all know the example with the chessboard, right? Like you just double, 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 and in the end you have so many grains of wheat or of rice, whatever it is, that it's 2 to the power of 64 minus 1. Keep the minus 1 in mind. So, and because, I don't know, because the first square you start with 1, I guess, right? Nevertheless, so how much wheat is that? Like this professor says, it's like 4 times the amount of all wheat in the world. So it's incredible of the power of doubling that exists that we cannot easily imagine. We cannot easily imagine the numbers that are rising from that. And if you consider the other scheme that he has shown, if you think about it in terms of investment, and let's say you get a child or a niece, you can make them a big present, right? Just give them $1,000. Just give them $1,000, but don't give it to them directly. Put it in, for example, I just suggest, no financial advice, put it into an MSCI World account. And tell them that you pay a bit of their retirement. Now, of course, you have to keep in mind inflation, but let's see. If you put $1,000 in there, right? When they're 10, it's 2,000. 20, it's 4,000. 30, it's 8,000. 40, it's 16,000. At 50, it's 32,000. And at 60, it's 64,000. Just waiting a bit longer. At 70, it's 128,000. And let's say if you put, I don't know, $2,000 in there, then of course it would be about $248,000. So this is the power of doubling, right? Like you can basically enhance the money you earn now. If you just wait 20 years until you pay it out to yourself, then it just quadrupled. And okay, I don't tell you anything new. I'm pretty sure everybody knows that. But this power of doubling is something that you should use to your advantage in your life. And Ray Kurzweil claims that the singularity operates on this scale, and therefore it's so hard for us to imagine. I found some more interesting examples from another researcher on the singularity. Let's look into these examples very briefly.
Mean. So our brain is very in tune in terms of thinking linearly. So if I say you take a step a meter, in 30 steps you would be 30 meters away. But if I say you take exponential steps, you double your steps every time you walk, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, in 30 steps, how far do you think you have gone? You would have gone 26 and a half times around the world, or a billion meters. And that's how fast technology is moving. And so at Singularity, we try to basically teach people to spot those trends and be prepared for it. So as you can see in this chart, that the we have now the computational power of slightly more than a mouse brain. So by 2025, 2029, we would have the ability to simulate an entire human brain. And by 2050, we'll have the computational power to essentially simulate every single human being's brain in the world. What are you going to do with all the computational power? And I thought I'll give you a quick snapshot in April 2017. Right? We now have about 7.5 billion people on this planet. We have 3.8 billion on the internet. And by 2020, we'll have about 6 billion, right? What does that mean for all of you? It's no better time than now to be an entrepreneur. You know, all your potential partners, customers, investors are all online. You can access them very easily. So this is a quick snapshot on the activity and what the internet, how fast it has grown. Another example is, IBM took 46 years to reach a valuation of $1 billion. Google took 8 years. Facebook took 5. And Groupon took 18. I think Snapchat is probably even less than that. So as you can see.
So these are quite interesting facts, right? And you see also that you can use that idea of exponential growth to your advantage. Bitcoin has just doubled crazily and it grew to a $1 trillion market, and now all the altcoins are rising, and they also have exponential parabolas that you can invest in. Again, no financial advice. But, you can look for small enterprises, right? I remember that I ordered on Amazon a lot of things and I thought, wow, that's quite convenient, but I didn't invest, right? I watched Netflix and I had a lot of friends who watched it, but I didn't invest. And these prices were quite low. When the iPod came out, I found that interesting. Wow, I thought that's an interesting idea and I used it, but I didn't invest in it, right? So the question would be how to invest in the singularity. And as I said before, yes, you can invest in value, right? You can invest in ketchup, like Berkshire Hathaway, Heinz ketchup, good German brand. Well, not German brand, Pittsburgh, where I lived for a long time. So yeah, you can invest in that, and then you may have steady growth. And in the past, value and growth, like, they matched. So whether you invested in value or growth, it didn't make much a difference. Didn't. Domino's Pizza, something that a lot of people missed out on. A chance that a lot of people missed out on, but it outperformed the whole market, even growth stocks. So for that reason, like, right, so far in history, it doesn't matter. But if the singularity is really on the rise and we are really talking about exponential growth, S-curves feeding into S-curves, as the ARK investor Katie Wood says, then maybe growth is the way to invest, like the way towards the singularity. So that's the question to you. Do you invest in the singularity? I really would like to know how. I would also like to invest. Be careful. There might be a correction soon. So maybe this is not the right way to start. But once, maybe in about 3 months, the correction happens and occurs and all the tech values go down like maybe 20%, you can have a good shopping day, right? Okay, having that all said, okay, now we are really set up for reading a little bit more of Kurzweil. We want to finish at least 1 page today so that we make a little bit of progress. So we have clarified now what is this exponential growth. And Ray Kurzweil, he looks now at scientists and engineers, and he says that what many of them have is a mindset of scientists' pessimism. That means that scientists are always very skeptical and are trained to be skeptical. Often they are so immersed in the difficulties and intricate details of contemporary challenge that they fail to appreciate the ultimate long-term implications of their own work and the larger field of work in which they operate. Scientists are trained to be skeptical. They speak cautiously of current research goals and rarely speculate beyond the current generation of scientific pursuit. So he doesn't say that that is wrong, right? That's maybe what you have to do in the field of technology. But given that most of what we observe in the 6 epochs that have preserved us, that everything was accelerating in terms of its growth, he says that's a wrong way to look at it. And he even goes so far that he calls it a law. He calls it the law of accelerating returns, not the law of diminishing returns. Because, yeah, it's true. Like, you produce something in your factory and it grows exponentially, but at some point you have diminishing returns because markets get saturated and so on and so forth. And that seems to be an economic law. So he plays on that and he says, no, there is a law of accelerating returns. Because once an exponential growth slows down, it will be replaced by another exponential growth. It will be replaced by another invention of another branch that former exponential growth just feeds in. And that's the way we should think. I don't know if that is true. I'm just like saying here, what is this theory, right? So he says that the skepticism does not serve society's interests now that a generation of scientific and technological progress comprises only a few years. He gives some example. Consider the biochemists who in 1990 were skeptical of the goal of transcribing the entire human genome in mere 15 years. These scientists had just spent an entire year transcribing a mere 1/10,000th of the genome. So even with reasonable anticipated advances, it seemed natural to them that it would take a century, if not longer, before the entire genome could be sequenced. And that's very interesting. I wonder whether they are frustrated, right? I mean, they took like so many years to transcribe the human genome, and it was a big discovery. And nowadays, you send it like to, what is that, the website? I send it there, like 23andMe, right? And they just analyze your genome in like a week, and probably in the lab, they do it like maybe in 10 minutes. I don't know. So I wonder what these scientists say. They say, wow, in 10 minutes, dude, I did that for 10 years. Shit, what did I do with my time, right? Maybe I should just have waited 10 years. So that's interesting. So here we have a tremendous amount of progress, right? Or consider the skepticism expressed in the mid-1980s that the internet would ever be a significant phenomenon. Given that it then included only tens of thousands of nodes. In fact, the number of nodes was doubling every year, so that there were likely to be tens of millions of nodes 10 years later. But this trend was not appreciated by those who struggled with state-of-the-art technology in 1985, which permitted adding only a few thousand nodes throughout the world in a single year. It's very interesting that people thought the internet would not be possible. We think it's so easy now, right? We have the internet everywhere. How could anybody have thought that it's not possible? So this is what he observes, and he sees that such predictions always will be overturned. But of course, he's also a bit critical. We also have to grant him this, because here he talks about the converse conceptual error occurs when certain exponential phenomena are first recognized and are applied in an overly aggressive manner without modeling the appropriate pace of growth. And here he speaks especially about the dot-com bubble that we had in the early 2000s, where a lot of companies came out that were having visions on the internet, but no real practical application yet. It was probably clear that the internet was the future, but without practical application, it just bubbled up and destroyed a lot of capital. I know my uncle, he never invested into stocks again because it just destroyed large amounts of his capital. And be aware, that might also happen to Bitcoin. Don't want to be ideological, right? For me, it's not a question of ideology. It may or may not happen, but let's compare it with the dot-com bubble. There were a lot of companies that had no practical application. And Bitcoin may very well be the currency of the future. But so far, I don't see many practical applications. And once the bubble starts bursting, you better run. You better run. Well, I invested a little in Bitcoin, so I don't think it's wrong, right? It's a speculation. Right now, it's a speculation. I do think it's the future if governments don't forbid it, but it's a speculation. And the question would be, how do you invest sustainably in these technologies? How do you invest sustainably in the singularity? That's what I would like to know. So another error that prognosticators, make is to consider the transformations that will result from a single trend in today's world as if nothing else will change. A good example is the concern that radical life extension will result in overpopulation and exhaustion of limited material resources to sustain human life, which ignores comparably radical wealth creation from nanotechnology and strong AI. For example, nanotechnology-based manufacturing devices in the 2020s will be capable of creating almost any physical product from inexpensive raw materials and information. So we will progress in so many research fields and areas that he's so optimistic. He thinks all our current problems or problems that we even imagine will be solved. But let's keep realistic. All the problems we have now, pollution of the environment, for example, are the result of the technical progress that we had before. There are many anthropologists who argue we should go back to the Stone Age. I don't defend that. But maybe they had a good life. What do I know? Maybe it's nice to be a dog out in the fields. Okay, and then he says, indeed, almost everyone he has met has a linear view of the future. So that's the problem. Do you have a linear view of the future? Or an exponential view? Well, I would like to know, what is your view on investing? Do you take the singularity into account? Do you try to use the law of accelerated returns for bettering your life, especially by investing? Which stocks do you buy? Do you invest in Bitcoin? Which coin do you recommend? I'm really interested to hear that. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. If you want to follow further of these readings, then please subscribe, hit the bell, you know the spiel. Also give me a like. So add me on the other channels on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you find me. Just make a connection, a meaningful connection, so that we can strive for the singularity. So let's close with a Vulcan saying again, live long and prosper.